Okay,
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Brian Daly. I'm a planner here at the Community Development Department at the district. With me is Daryl Abbs, who is the consultant working on the DCC and ACC bylaw update, and I'm going to pass it over to him to go through a presentation, and then after that we will have an open discussion amongst the members who are attending. With that, I'll pass it to Daryl.
Thanks, Brian. Do you want to just throw it? Perfect. Thanks, Brian. So my name's Daryl Abbs. I'm a managing partner with Watson and Associates Economists. And as Brian mentioned, we're the consultants assisting the district in preparing the development cost charge update, the amenity cost charge study, and both bylaws. And so I'll briefly go through, and I'm sure a lot of you are aware of what DCCs are and why the district uses them. But we'll talk a little bit more about what the calculated rates are, and then how the DCCs and ACCs will work with respect to the current regime of DCCs and community amenity contributions. A lot of acronyms thrown around, but I think we're all pretty well versed in what they are. So with the recent legislative changes from 2023, local governments are now allowed to pass an amenity cost charge bylaw, which is very similar to the development cost charge. And I'll go through the similarities and differences a little bit later in the slides. And so what we're doing here is updating the DCC bylaws. We have two new master plans, the water master plan and the transportation master plan, which provide updated capital costs and new growth forecasts. And so we're incorporating that information into the updated DCC rates, and then as well looking at the ACCs. And so this is really to provide initial feedback. It's very similar to the presentation that was presented to council yesterday. And so you all know that municipalities and districts, local governments are using DCCs and ACCs to recover the capital costs associated with new development. And so this is in addition to what you would normally pay as part of your development, your subdivision, which is all identified through the subdivision servicing bylaws. And so, kind of the guidance that comes from the province is that, these are revenue tools that are used to reduce the burden on taxpayers of funding infrastructure. But, as part of the process, we do need to consider that the municipal assist factor, where the district would provide some sort of funding towards the growth-related component of this infrastructure. And so at a very high level, we take the total cost we need to recover, divided by the associated development, and we get our development cost charge and our amenity cost charge per unit for residential growth. And then for non-residential growth, we're looking at the development cost charge, it should say per square meter. You'll notice we don't have an ACC for non-residential growth, and that was based on the current policies of recovering the Parks DCC from only the residential side. We'd continue that policy for the ACC. And so we're only looking at imposing the ACC on residential growth. And so based on the Local Government Act, there's a lot of similarities. If you look at the legislation, the wording, it's very, very similar with some minor differences. And so in DCCs, what they've done is they've added the ability to include solid waste and recycling facilities, fire and police, as well highway facilities where there's a cost-sharing agreement with the province. In addition to that, we could always include sewage, water, drainage, and roads, highway-related projects. Within the costs, we can include the planning, engineering, legal, and interest costs if we do need to finance these projects. All of that would be incorporated into the total cost of the project. On the ACC side of things, the definition is a little more open-ended. And so what it says is it's a facility or feature that provides social, cultural, heritage, recreational, or environmental benefits. And then it says including without limitation, and then lists a number of different types of facilities you could include. And so community, youth, or senior center, recreational or athletics facility, libraries, daycare facility, public square, and then we've put other because it's including without limitation. Just want to note at the outset, we have only incorporated, and I'll get into the anticipated costs in a little bit, but we've only incorporated those bullets that they've provided in the legislation, the suggested facilities. We haven't looked at a broader definition of what facilities we could include. In determining benefit, so it's very similar in determining if it's related to new development or if it should be taxpayer funded or non-growth related. In terms of timing of collection, it's the exact same wording. And so ACCs would be imposed very similar to DCCs. With respect to approval, the DCCs do have to go to the inspector of municipalities. We have to send this information to the province. They might ask questions on our approach to benefit to the existing community and growth, et cetera. And all that has to happen before the district can pass the bylaw. On the ACC side of things, we don't need inspector approval. Nothing goes to the province. We need to have consultation, and then we bring forward the bylaws to council for their consideration. Okay. In terms of exemptions from the charges, so the legislation is pretty prescriptive. There are mandatory exemptions if you're exempt from taxation, like places of worship. And then there's discretionary exemptions on the DCC side of things. So the residential development, if there's less than 4 units, if the development is less than 29 square meters, and if the value of the permit's less than $50,000. And so there's some wiggle room there for the district to adjust those parameters or charge those types of developments. In terms of waiving or reducing the charges, district can waive or reduce the charges for not-for-profit rental housing and for-profit affordable rental housing for both DCCs and ACCs, but they need to have a bylaw which sets out the parameters that define those things. For DCCs, there's a couple others where subdivisions have low greenhouse gas emissions or they're designed in low environmental impact can also be included there. With respect to the municipal assist factor, this is something that's not explicit in the legislation, but it does, based on best practices and historical interpretation, the practice is to include at least 1% municipal assist factor. So as part of undertaking these studies, the recommendation is always to start with 1%, see what the rates are, and then have your consultation with the development community, with the public, determine if the rates are going to be have a negative impact on development activity or the economy, and then council can then consider a higher municipal assist factor. So very similar pieces of legislation. And so when we look at the calculations, when we're looking at the growth forecast, we're utilizing the growth forecast set out in the new transportation master plan and the new water master plan, which look at growth to 2041. So about 26,000 new people and about 11,300 new units, 12,500 employees, and about 4.9 million square feet of floor space for non-residential development. So in terms of a summary of the capital costs, you can see in total for the DCCs, it's about $456.7 million over that period to 2041. Now, you'll see the majority of that is the transportation infrastructure. And I'll come back to that in the next slide. So based on the new transportation master plan, this is the overall capital cost estimate that was identified. The benefit to existing development would be the non-growth related share of the projects. And that would leave us with our net capital cost. We have some other deductions which would relate to grants. And so I think there are a number of transportation projects that there's some funding from other sources or the cost sharing agreement with the province. And so for roads, you can see that $343 million nets down to about $267.5 million. Then with the 1% municipal assist factor, we're down to about $265 million. With respect to the other services, you can see in total, there's about $90 million more to bring us up to about that $354 million over the period to 2041. And so when we look at what that means in terms of the current DCC rates versus what's proposed or calculated, you can see for the residential, it go up by just over 100%, and the non-residential would go up by 182%, 179, or 133, depending on the type. Now, what's important here to note is, as part of the current CACs, it includes active transportation. Now, under the DCCs, it includes active transportation. So the active transportation would fall away from the CACs, and now it's being imposed under the DCCs. So towards the end of the slides, I'll give you kind of a comparison of what do I pay today and what would I pay under the proposed new rates, to give you a fulsome view of what you might actually have to pay in reality. And so this was a slide we brought forward to council. And really what we're saying is, when we're looking at the transportation master plan, had a significant capital cost estimate in the master plan. And so that was to maintain the current level of service, or provide the level of service recommended by the consultants of the master plan. As part of that process, a kind of more scoped list of capital projects was brought forward to council for their consideration, which would bring that list down to about $150 million from the 343. And so what we wanted to show council was kind of what is the impact of that. And so the impact of that would be, if you want to go with the lower level of capital spending, then that would reduce your level of service potentially from what's proposed under the master plan. If we wanted to say go with the higher capital list, but we wanted the lower rate, which reflects the lower capital list, what would the impact be? And so to do that, that would require a 51% municipal assist factor to bring that rate down to whatever the lower capital amount is. And you can see the percentage change in the rates would be obviously less. And so 28%, around 30% to 40% for residential, and 30 to 46% for non-residential. Okay, so pretty big difference. Now that would require the municipal assist factor, so the district, to fund about $130 million from the tax base. And that's going towards the growth related projects. So something we put out there for consideration of council. So the next few slides really just show a comparison of the DCC rates in neighboring communities. Some of these bylaws were updated from various times. You can see, I think West Vancouver, the district of West Vancouver is like from 1994. But the charges, you can see the current charge is about $21,616 for a single family dwelling. If we were to go with the full charge, it would put us up second, just behind Port Moody. If we were to go with the scoped list of capital projects, it would bring us the upper middle range of the DCCs, about $27,700. For townhouses, same kind of idea, except we're at the lower end currently. That would, with the highest capital program for roads, would bring us up to about the middle of the survey, and then similarly for apartments. When we're looking at non-residential, however, it has a much more significant impact, and you can see the roads charge is a very large component. And so either way, the increased roads DCC would put us at the highest end of the survey for commercial developments. When we're looking at industrial, if we went with the full charge, it would be the highest of the survey. Otherwise, it would be kind of in the middle. And then for institutional, it would still put us at the high end of the survey. Okay, so pretty big impact from the roads side of things. So then we looked at the ACCs. And so what we've looked at is community centers, the library, cultural space, sport courts, and the parks that aren't able to be funded with DCCs. And we did reach out to the province to kind of confirm what can be in the DCC versus the ACC. I mentioned we were only imposing this on we would only be imposing this on the residential side of things, not on the non-residential side. And again, we started with that 1% municipal assist factor for the calculations. So in terms of total project costs, we're looking at about $158 million, with about 23 million coming from taxpayers through the benefit to the existing, the non-growth related component. There's 12 million in other deductions, which leaves us with about 123 million less the municipal assist factor, so about 122 million anticipated to be funded with the ACCs. And so when we're looking at a survey of rates, I think it's hard to compare to others. There's not a lot of ACC bylaws out there. But just to show an example of some of the other municipalities and districts that have imposed ACCs. Yep.
Is that the district or this?
Um,
Those are two different municipalities.
yeah, I believe it was the district, but I'll double check.
I think you're right. I think I recall their fees being quite high.
Yeah.
Could likely be the district.
Yeah.
Town meeting, they'll-
Yeah, and then Burnaby's is relatively high. I think they've transitioned to using DCCs and ACCs a little bit more now. And so I think what's important to understand is kind of how does this all fit in with the current CAC, the Community Amenity Contribution Regime. And so currently CACs are imposed for general amenities, active transportation, and parks. And then in addition, depending on the density, you might be required to have some on-site affordable housing or childcare requirements. And so with the general amenities, active transportation, and parks, those are currently charges. And so we would propose to take those charges away and utilize the ACCs instead. But the requirements for the high density needs for affordable housing and childcare could remain. So just to kind of summarize the services that are imposed and recovered for under each, you'll see under the DCC side of things, right now it's water, sewer, drainage, roads, and parks. Under the proposed, it's water, sewer, drainage, roads, parks. Roads includes active transportation, which is previously under the CAC. And then there's the potential to add solid waste. One of the councilors yesterday mentioned that there's a landfill expansion that should be incorporated as well. So, and it is something that's now eligible. So I think under the next round of discussions, we'll provide some information on that. And so for the CACs, you'll see the general, the active transportation, the parks goes away, and then you'll have the ACCs as well. So just to kind of give you a sense of what's happening there. And so with that, we wanted to kind of show, well, what's the relative impact with the current charges in the current regime versus what the proposed charges would be. And so if you have the density where you have less than 20 units in a single detached development under CACs, the charges would total $73,616 a unit. With our calculated charges, they would actually go down to $61,094 per unit. Where the density is higher than 20 units, the charges were substantially lower for the general or the active transportation parks in general CACs. And so I think if your density was less than 20 units, it was $52,000 a lot. And if it's higher than 20 units, it's $15,000 a lot. So when we're looking at the relative comparison of current to calculated charges, it would go up by about 67%. And this is with the full roads charge imposed. So you can see townhouses, if your development is less than 30 units, it will go down by about 13%. And if it's more than 30 units, it'll go up by about 75%. And then for apartments, it would go up either 24 or 104%. Okay. And so with the next steps in this process, we're going to compile the feedback. We heard a lot of feedback from council yesterday about having public consultation, so with the members of the public, not just the development community. So I think the intent is to have a joint session once we've more firmed up the numbers and information for the charges. We will then prepare the final models. We'll bring the draft bylaws to council. So they need to have first 3 readings of the DCC bylaw before we can send the information package to the inspector of municipalities. And then once they approve that, we can pass the DCC bylaw, but council can pass the ACC bylaws on the 3rd reading. So with that, happy to open it up for discussion. Thanks.
Just a quick question. You mentioned the joint meeting, so there would be a meeting with mayor and council and the public and builders and so on. Everyone would be in a room to discuss it, or?
Well, the invitation would likely, like council, for those types of meetings, we'll often let them know it's happening. They may or may not attend, but it'll just be like an open meeting, yeah, with more broadly with like builders and kind of any member of the general public that's interested in participating.
I think it'd be helpful to have the builders sit in the room with mayor and council. I feel like it just goes, there's never a direct discussion. There's a lot of really, important high level points that would be better made in a dialogue.
Mhm.
This is a big deal, right? It's just a thought.
Yep.
Let's see, we have a hand up. You can
Hi.
go ahead.
Just based on the report, I couldn't really tell what the effective date of this would be or any grandfathering or in-stream protections that this would have.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So the in-stream protections that apply to the DCC also apply to the ACC. And so that's in the legislation. So that would have to apply. With respect to the effective date of the bylaws, I think we're targeting February would be the hopeful date, I think, would be what we're targeting to bring this forward in passage. So February, March, probably at the latest.
Yeah, I think to build on that one, just being really clear in the language of the local bylaw with regard to CACs that have already been secured and exemptions to ACC burden based on what has been secured previously.
Thank you.
I think what I mentioned before the meeting is projects that are underway, like Waterfront or Garibaldi, that had maybe not so much freeors, but adjacent works that were DCC projects that are now suddenly being asked to be funded by the builder midstream. That should be part of the grandfathering discussion. It shouldn't be possible to add a project that wasn't there when we secured our rezoning. And I can be more specific on that, but it's a general comment. It's not just the rate you're paying, it's the projects that are included. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so you're saying the projects that were identified at the time of the rezoning?
Yeah.
I'll have to double check if we're allowed to do that. Well, I'll ask the province, but they're very specific on
You're
what.
allowed to add or to,
No, if we're allowed to only impose the charge based on the previous projects. Because the legislation is very clear that you can only waive or reduce charges in very specific circumstances. And the charges are imposed either at the time of the development agreement or the building permit. And so we'll have to verify if we're able to do that. I don't know if the legislation will allow us to do that.
okay.
But in your scenario, is it a project that is now off the DCC list?
Well, it was a sanitary upgrade adjacent to Garibaldi Springs that we were clearly told that it would be DCC works.
Right.
And now I'm being told it's not. And it's something.
Right, so it was removed from the project list.
Yeah,
Right,
it was previously not on the project. Yes, exactly. It's removed
Right.
from the 10-year.
right.
Put on my project.
Right.
list. Yeah. Okay, that's just doesn't seem right. It shouldn't be able to be something that can happen.
Yeah, if there's a specific project that has been required as part of like the subdivision servicing bylaw as part of your development that you have to fund, then it's not a DCC project, is what you're saying?
But previously it was.
Previously
But
it
in
was,
the new list, it's been taken off the list.
okay,
And now it's at midway, 5 years of the project, it's becoming my problem.
right, okay. So yeah, if you can identify the specific project.
Yeah, and I don't want to make it specific to me. It's more of a general comment.
Yeah, that's
And
okay.
I've got another comment related to that. In the table that you had for capital costs, it would be helpful to have the 2023 capital costs. You only have the current.
Mhm.
Because I think it's important to show how much I think that the capital cost budget has increased. I think it's probably significantly higher than the previous one. Maybe I'm wrong, I don't know, but it'd be helpful to see that. Like you've got, or even having year to year or something, but it's just showing a
Yeah.
snapshot.
Yeah, I think so. It'll be a bit more challenging for like the transportation master plan, which is all 2024 costs,
Yeah.
right? So we have all those projects identified in current costs.
Well, that's my point. Those are all new, right?
Yeah.
So it would be good for council to say, oh, this is what it was in oh, Jesus, it went to this, right?
Mhm.
It's a big bump.
Yeah.
And that's not clear. Like that just looks like it's just kind of a thing. So I think having that on the table is just good information for the public and builders and for council.
And that's where it goes back to, like, there used to be the map, right? And there's R1 through R20, and each one's identified on the map.
Yeah.
And so I think like that's the information
Yeah,
that
you
we
need a
need.
graphic that says blue was 2023 and red's the additional.
Yeah.
Like that is really important to show that because it's a change in thinking. And that's fine.
There's people online. Oh.
That's all you need. That's it.
That's it.
You're supposed to be here.
So you want to see the current projects that are on the list and what the cost is in 2023 dollars, and then the additional projects that are added to the
Yeah,
list.
like how the list changed from 2023 to 2024,
Gotcha.
graphically and in a table. Because I mean, these fees are dominated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's massive, right? So it needs to be understood why that's happening. And this is a very significant part of any project of the DCCs, right? I don't know if we're jumping around and just trying to.
No, that's okay.
I would be careful with quoting $73,616 as the increase of a home. It's very specific. It's probably not correct. It might be correct, but they're very exact numbers, which gives the illusion that there's like a preciseness to it that doesn't actually exist. So just a comment, like those should be round numbers, 75,000, whatever, because it's not that precise of a science. I wish it was. But a little bit of a footnote to that table as to what numbers are being used, like what's the average house price, like what are you guys using to calculate that? You know, just judge whether that's true to their experience or not, because looking at it, it's hard to tell where it's coming from. So just a bit of base information would help.
Yeah, and you're good point. I think even noting like the size of the units that we've assumed, right? Like
Yeah.
for townhouses, we assume like 1,200 square feet. If that makes sense, maybe it doesn't. For apartments, we used I think 700 square feet, right? So if that doesn't make sense, maybe we should use
Yeah, I
something
mean,
else.
that's just a few base, like
Yeah.
we assumed an average price of $800,000 for a townhome, whatever it is, right?
Mhm.
Because you have to assume the price in there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and
that-
if you have prices that you like that you think would be representative of the market.
I gave a bunch to the journalists.
Okay.
Yeah,
Perfect.
but in general, just for the building community to see that base information would be helpful.
Mhm.
And along that line, it's strange to me that the type of home that you want the most from a planning perspective, which is apartments, is being punished the most by this. Single family is unaffected, and it should be the other way around.
Mhm.
Like we build single family too. I'm not helping myself here, but
Yeah.
what you're trying to do is encourage density, and you're actually, single family is one that seems to be, we promote this as the type we want going forward. And I don't know if that's a political decision or why that would be that way, but it seems strange to me. It seems backwards.
Yeah, and it's a function of the calculations being because the charges are on a per unit basis, and the best practice guide is really prescriptive on how we have to allocate the cost for, let's say, for transportation. We need to use trip generation rates and apply those to each of the different types of units, and then weight them. And so it's specific to the different metrics that we're kind of suggested to use as part of the best practices guide.
And I understand that, but the outcome is flawed, right? Yeah, there's something not working there that shouldn't be out.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a challenge. One
And
of the
even more so, a single family home could have 4 families living in it.
yeah.
It should be double at least, right? 'Cause that-
Yeah, we based it on the average persons per unit based on Stats Can data. So, that's the best available data.
And that's what we can do. I get
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
But there's more people in a single family home than in a 1 bedroom.
Right. Yes,
So,
for sure.
and they're using the roads, putting the sidewalks and everything else. Right? So
Yeah, yeah.
just a comment. Sorry, I'm just jumping into my list.
No, go for it. Yeah,
I have to say, I mean, this is just me being crotchety. I can't stand municipal to municipal comparisons. It
Mhm.
means nothing.
yeah.
You guys should only be looking at what we want in Squamish, a library, whatever it is. Figure out what it costs and charge a rate. It's irrelevant. Especially if you're using District of North Vancouver. They all have different political agendas. They all have different cultures. I know you have to do it, but like the councilors look like, oh, we're in the middle. I mean, it might be a municipality that's 5 times bigger.
Yeah.
It might be, you know, like there's a whole lot of other information related to that rate that is not clear. And they just think we're in the middle. That's thumbs up. Good stuff. We're not at the top, we're not at the bottom. I don't know. That's just my personal opinion. I think it's irrelevant. It's not relevant to what you guys are doing. It should only be relevant to what Squamish is doing. You mentioned there's a consultation requirement for the ACC
Mhm.
with the builders. What is that specifically? What's the requirement? What are the parameters of it? How many meetings? Like what's the?
Well, there's no specific parameters in the legislation, so it's kind of up to the
That's
district
what
to
I'm asking.
determine.
So
Yeah.
What is it? Like, tell us what the meetings will be, because to go to one meeting of our UDI liaison and say we consulted,
Mhm.
that's not enough.
Yeah.
That's what I'm getting at with the discussion with council. There needs to be more. This is affecting, and this, my last thing I think I'll say, oh, one other thing. Is this now that you guys are involved, is this going to be an annual review? Because I think what's going on here is this has been left, and this happens, I get that, but this has been left for 30 years since the last update, maybe 3 or 4. I don't know.
As 2022 was the last update.
So that's 3.
Yeah.
So will it be an annual sort of touching up, or is there a set idea about frequency of the update?
Well, I think it will be ultimately up to the district to do that. I think if what I always recommend to everyone is if you have a new master plan, then you should be updating because it should reflect the latest and greatest plans. If you have significant changes in specific projects, maybe you don't need a project, maybe you got a grant for a project, then you should be updating. At a minimum, updating annually, you can update for indexing to keep the charge in line with capital costs. It's just a minor amendment with the province. So it's really, I think, it's good to hear the feedback. And if you have feedback to update on.
Well, my feedback would be that I think the people that do this the best in the Lower Mainland is Surrey. They have a great system for DCCs. It's very collaborative. And it's an annual meeting with the building community. They do their work annually, so that doesn't become a giant ball of goo to deal with. It's annual and it's tweaking, and we all look at the roads, we look at the map. Builders are in the room, everybody talks, and you know, you can take our advice or not. But at least it's collaborative and it's annual and it's not as shocking.
Right.
And if there's, you know, I get that Squamish, you know, doesn't have the capacity in hosts, but if you're paying someone like Watson, I would argue that maybe it's any different in cost if you do it a little bit every year as opposed to a lot every 3 years. So just a thought, like it would be good to know or have it written down what the aspiration is for review. And I wouldn't tie it to a master plan. It's a Squamish that might happen every 7 years. Like it's
Right.
way too long.
Mhm.
So it's something to think about. And then just my only last point, because I got to get to a site meeting, but I really would love to see the developer play language be gone. And what should be said is the cost of new homes, or it's a cost to new homes. It's not developer pay, it's new development pays or new home prices or something. We need to change that language because literally we don't pay it.
Yeah.
We just flow it through, right? So it's not and I think the perception for new counselors, there's counselors in this council that would go, oh, yes, developers are paying. Well, we're not, we don't,
Mhm.
right? So that language I think is flawed. It gives the wrong impression of who is actually funding it. So like if you've got a new library, I don't understand why the thinking is that it seems like 100% of that new library is the burden of new development, whereas the community's using it. And I guess the argument is that we need a new library because we have new development, but the whole community is using the library. So the assist shouldn't be 1%. That doesn't make sense to me, but I don't, and this isn't I'm not an expert in this stuff, but that just doesn't feel right at all. It's a community amenity. It shouldn't be 99% funded by new development, when only 10% or 5% is new development using it. So.
Mind if I jump in?
Sorry?
Can I jump in?
Yeah, of course, please.
Yeah, so on my list, you know, something that I always ask for and I get sometimes is the reserves in each pot of money that have been collected from DCCs, because like if you're front ending roadworks or whatever, it's good to know if you're going to get paid. Was a time when we were working here and there was nothing in the reserve, so we front ended that work and didn't get paid for 2 or 3 years down the line. I think publishing that annually is going to be really beneficial for us to understand where the municipality stands. Jenna Stoner brought it up last night, but I think there are issues with these charges on commercial. Industrial seems to be a bit less, but like commercial projects are tough in this community right now. And so any additional burden, I think, is going to negatively affect what is clearly the goals of council, which is like tying employment lands with residential lands. I think that needs to be, and I know you're kind of hamstrung with what you can and can't do, but it needs to be looked at really carefully. I think it would be really useful if you guys looked at over the last 10 years, how many times have you updated the CAC policy? How many times have you updated the DCC policy? What was that change? Development takes a really long time. And so you're not seeing any projects that are even done with the last version, really, of the DCC bylaw or the CAC policy, or very few. Each kind of step makes those projects a bit more difficult. And I think it would be good to, because I know that they've changed a lot. They went from not having a policy when I started the CACs to, you know, $15 a square foot or whatever it is. And so with that, I think it's a bit of a shame that the province said affordable housing can be part of that ACC policy, because it's a huge gap. And I think what my fear would be is that you're taking the existing CAC policy and now you're just adding an extra charge. And that's going to be a huge struggle, because already I think there's a misconception around affordable housing and even rental housing as an understanding from this community. Like if I was looking at your table, if you want rental housing to be built in this community, which is one of the big gaps I think we have, I think you want to look at being more aggressive on DCCs and ACCs for just market rental, because already it's not the same as for sale condo product. And so it goes like encouraging what you want to see built in the community, and adding cost to the things that you want to see the most doesn't seem like the right idea. So I'd consider that closely.
So kind of more on the waiving of charges for affordable.
Even market rental, like market rental housing does not garner the same returns as for sale condo product by a pretty significant margin.
It doesn't even pencil right now.
Yeah.
It's almost, you need free land.
So I think that needs to be considered, because it's definitely adding cost to that. It's going to make it really tough. Like, for instance, I know, Brian, you're working right now on that the ARM3, ARM2 analysis. Like when we looked at that, it wasn't really penciling, and even the update, I haven't looked at it in detail, but I think there's got to be a better understanding of like what the current environment is right now. And there, I think like you said, there's a reason why there's a bunch of projects that haven't started. Everyone's waiting for something to drop, and nothing seems to be dropping.
Just on that point, we'll get you back. So make sure that more coordinates.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I guess the one challenge is the definitions for what you can exempt, right? Like for-profit affordable rental. It's like I guess you could play with the definition of that to try and include market rental, but I guess it would come down to if the inspector municipalities would let that fly or not.
And I don't know if there's an appetite for it. Like, but I think there needs to be a general understanding of like, these projects aren't the gold stars that they were maybe 10 years ago. Like they're harder to bring to market. And I think they are also exactly what our town needs. Because again, if we're growing an employment base, we need a workforce. That workforce can be transitory. You know,
Yeah.
there's all these reasons why it makes a lot of sense.
Is there information you can share, like numbers or examples that you can share with
Well, we've been
with us,
working with
council?
Ryan
Okay.
will update, like we've done one round of Terry on the proposed policy, we'll do another one. But yeah, it's still a little bit out of reality right now, so we'll get there.
Because I think that's important in terms of showing the numbers, right? Especially for the public and council, right?
Yeah.
And then
No, definitely.
to your point of, you know, that it gets passed on and, you know, it's, you know, there's always the discussion of that it's, you know, just eats into the developer's profits, but really the challenge is the rates being a certain level, they might determine whether a project starts or not. And that's the difference. I think that's if you have information and numbers on that,
Yeah.
that everyone can see, then I think that's super helpful.
And honestly, like the projects that are on the RM2, 3 are probably not something that we would even do, but we want to help to make it something that somebody would do. Because right now, nobody's going to do it. Because it's voluntary. Nobody's going to take it up the way it's written right now. And you do want to have something that is enticing, just enticing enough that somebody does it. So.
Okay, and then I know it was brought up at council yesterday, but you know, when I read the transportation management plan and all of the projects, it's awesome. All the projects our community needs, but like when I interpret it, I'm like, oh, this is a great document to go and get funding, right? Because we clearly have a plan, we have a pathway, and now every year we can go and say, hey, we want to fund these projects. And I understand that I understand the municipal funding aspect that you've got there, or the grant funding, is what's been already awarded. Basically, you can't really assume any of that funding coming in. But in doing so, there's got to be a assumption, right? We think we're going to get X% over the next 20 years, and maybe your expectation is you're going to get 20%, but you've put in 5. But at least 5 is going to kind of bring that number back down to something a bit more reasonable, because otherwise you're just drawing additional funds that you don't need to necessarily.
Yeah, the challenge is if it goes the other way, then we're not getting enough funds based on the funding plan, right? If we don't get even, let's say we said, oh, it's 5% and we don't get 5%, we get nothing.
Yeah.
Then the district is out, right?
So the question is, what's the reasonable assumption based on historical data and
then
provincial
debates.
bodies? Yeah. Yeah.
Or have that part of the debate.
Yeah. I wouldn't even put single detached less than 20 units in the table, because I don't think a proposal exists. And I don't think there will, my understanding is there won't be one for the foreseeable future. So it may be a benefit to that imaginary parcel of land that does not exist. So I wouldn't worry about it. Yeah. And just going back to like that overall CAC policy and what's identified in this ACC policy, there's got to be a really clear outline to council about, okay, here's what your focus has been for the last 10 years within this policy. Here's what we're able to charge for. These, as you can see, the one thing you've been focused on, you can't actually charge for. So,
yeah, even the graphic shows 2 boxes that are now 3 boxes. Like if you look at the graphic,
Mhm.
and it looks cumulative, and they're
Yeah.
actually stacked on top of one another.
Yeah.
Just so, yeah, it to show the dollars that are moving over to ACCs or whatever, that it doesn't, exactly like you say, it's not a cumulative.
and then just what we were talking about before, like really explicit understanding of projects that have paid that CAC or secured that CAC for land development agreement, phase development agreement. I think phase development agreement is what's used in the provincial white paper that's on it. I think there are very few phase development. I think Oceanfront has a phase development agreement. There's maybe one more in the province, and that's it. So I think what it probably means to say is a land development agreement. That needs to be super clear for all parties.
Yeah, I think as part of this bylaw, we noticed it wasn't in the last one. I think we'd add the in-stream protection stuff like right in the bylaw.
Yeah.
Just so it's clear for everyone.
Perfect.
Okay, any comments from Emma, Kevin, Annika?
I'm good. I talked to Carlos and Kevin about it yesterday, so they've covered everything I wanted to chat about.
I think I just had a clarifying question on the draft TMP. maybe I missed this. Is this for completely new infrastructure, or does this include existing infrastructure improvements?
So the transportation master plan, the projects that we pulled in are the additional projects, and then where there's improvements to existing, we've applied that benefit to existing deduction. So I think the listing is in the transportation master plan. That's the list that we've used for the DCC calculation. So it's both. It's growth and non-growth.
Okay, so the existing wouldn't be funded by the DCCs.
Correct. So we made the deductions for benefit to existing to address the kind of replacement or rehab component of the infrastructure. And then, yeah, if it's something that's just a pure replacement, then it wouldn't be on the list.
Okay, thank you.
We have anyone else online who's got some questions? Fire away. Kevin, I bet you have some. That's not.
Kevin.
Like Kevin, yeah, you probably. Oh, we can't hear you. Oh, yeah.
I'm good here. No questions.
Questions?
Okay. Well,
Great.
that was shorter than anticipated.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess our next steps will be to compile this feedback. And then, yeah, like Daryl said, once we have a bit more direction, like we have to look at those solid waste costs. And like once we have a pretty finalized version of what it's probably going to look like, then we can, do another engagement with kind of a much broader audience and then sort of take that feedback and then kind of look at council. Obviously, we also are a little bit tied by the direction with that transportation master plan. That's got to go back in January, and that's going to inform obviously how the rates shake out a bit. And then, yeah, like we said, we're looking at the solid waste piece and what's eligible. So yeah, we'll definitely be doing probably in the new year a more broad event with kind of anyone who wants to come. We'll send the invitation at TEI again, and then the local builders, and then, yeah, the general public. Probably get a project page going soon with some more layperson information. So anyone who's interested in trying to figure out what DCCs are can look at that. And definitely appreciate your guys' feedback. There's lots of good suggestions in here, especially with respect to trying to get this information more digestible for folks who just think that this is a cost that developers pay when that's not the case.
Yeah, and like ultimately, I think the maps are so compelling, right? Like if you look at the transportation management plan map, what was out there, there's a whole bunch of things that we need, right? And so like I think for the community to see like, oh, this is going to help us get all the things we need in the next 20 years is good. It also would be interesting probably to see like that comparison. What were the projects that were on the list that were completed last time, and what's disappeared, maybe gone on someone else's plate that shouldn't, and
What's been added.
yeah, and what's been added, yeah.
Because that's the big change.
And then if you're willing to share like the factors that go into the analysis of why you put municipal share at a certain amount, like if I look at that total budget, the existing residence portion does seem quite low. So, and that could be virtue of who's getting the benefit from these pieces of infrastructure, but it would be good to just, if you're willing to share the numbers, I think that is going to give us more confidence or allow us to at least have something to comment on.
It actually reminds me of another thing I wrote down was that like just saying all 1% or all 51% doesn't look like it's been carefully considered for what each thing is. Like to that point, like a new library is not 100% new development. Shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a 38 and this one's a 42, or I don't know if there's, but it seems like it's universally, and maybe that's only to for the purposes of explaining what it means, but seems like that needs to be a little more carefully considered.
Yeah, so there's two factors there. So the benefit to existing is the non-growth share versus the growth share. And then the municipal assist factor is the growth related share that's being funded by the district. So the two separate things, just so, and then on the municipal assist factor side of things, like when we have, 1% that applies to the whole service, we have to do it that way. That's what the legislation says. Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess back to the discussion we had before we started about taxation and future tax revenues, you now, I'm assuming then you have the numbers of how many units are coming online, what are the size of the units, you're gonna have an idea of what the price of the units are. You will be able to determine what's the additional expected tax revenue at the existing mill rate from that, right?
Yep.
And so I think that's the full picture that I think everyone would benefit from. Because if you're saying, oh, it's a 51% municipal share and taxes are now going to have to go up an equivalent to fund $30 million a year, that's not going to be as digestible as saying, oh, we're going to bring on X amount of units. They're going to create this much tax revenue.
Yeah.
That's how this municipal share is potentially covered to some extent.
Yeah, if we're going to include the revenue, the assessment revenue, then we also have to include the additional costs that come with it, right? The operational costs that are included, right? All the additional services that are applied. So I hear you. It does add new assessment, new tax revenue for sure. But there's also additional costs that come with it that aren't capital, right? That's operating costs. So
yeah, I think the journey that Squamish has been on over the last 10 years has been centered around, we have all this infrastructure. If infrastructure is spread across quite a long community, how do we infill and densify within that so that the per unit basis is actually net positive to taxpayers, or at least it breaks even? I know I've talked to counselors about like trying to understand what that number is. Like, what's the cost of building a unit downtown to the taxpayer based on the tax revenue that's created by it versus a unit that's in a greenfield site elsewhere? It's a bigger picture conversation, but like to just show cost increases without showing that those cost increases come with additional tax revenue is, I think, going to create a situation where it's going to be very easy for some to say, well, let development pay for it. Right. Not really understanding that that's just flowing through to new units.
the new homeowners.
You're burdening future owners.
Yeah.
I think it's a really fundamental and really good point, because I think what I like about working in Squamish is you guys do consider new ideas. And I think that is the way it should be looked at. And you say, well, you have to factor in operational costs. They're all there. It's just putting them into a different table. Like, it's not like you having to generate what it costs to run City Hall or any of these things. It is actually just creating that income statement. And I think that does give the proper picture, and it may be net neutral, and we may end up at the same point. But I think if we keep using the library example, or if you use City Hall, this is a fixed cost. It isn't really changing for the foreseeable future. There is staffing increases. But some things don't actually change with 5,000 more residents.
Right. So they
Some are
will,
linear,
right.
some are fixed.
Some will incrementally
Right.
change.
So like having that information in there, I mean, for all of us, it's just all we're trying to do is make the best decision. And that can only be made with the most information, the most accurate information. And it might set up as being a good model for other municipalities, right?
Yeah, I think so. Some local governments will do like a long-term financial plan, and they'll incorporate all of that information in there, right? And so our firms conducted these across the country. And typically what we see is residential development is about break even if it's higher density, and then greenfield, it's usually a net impact to the tax base. With non-residential development, especially industrial development, it's usually a net positive. So in general, like that's what we've seen over doing this for like 30 years.
Yeah, and then like Carl's made a little while ago, like you might find that the commercial, for example, is being net or showing a net positive over here, but yet we're punishing it, and that might change the balance of these fees get applied. Sorry, I guess I gotta go. So
Thanks for your time.
this was
Thank you very much.
You guys keep going. It's just I'm gonna take off. All right, nice meeting you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too.
Yeah, I think that perspective would be awesome, because I know for sure it's a question that's asked a lot, and at the same time, like geographically, we are very unique, right? We're not a city that can go out, like we're not a Calgary, and so if you're looking at numbers in Calgary, it's going to be really different than it is Squamish. So I know it's a scope increase probably, Brian, but if you got any leftover money in the coffers there, I feel like that information would be really useful to present a clear picture. And then ultimately what we need to see is DCC's, ACC's, existing CAC policy and how that's all going to be modified. What's the total number for the units that we're looking at now, for the units that are going to go through additional density? Probably some good, like, I think you really want to tie it also to the multi-unit housing bylaw so that like there's a clear understanding now, because I think there are people that are out there actively looking at properties that are looking at single family lots and saying, okay, I'm going to take the single family lot, I'm going to make 4 units out of it. If you suddenly come in and say, hey, actually, by the way, you're going to pay $60,000 more on top of that as a fee, that project is no longer profitable. So I think it's really important to have that out there sooner than later. And then ultimately, yeah, like having flexibility within the CAC policy, because there's going to be larger developments like the ones that we work on or probably gonna work on, where you're going to be coming with a suite of amenities that are over and above just the fee, right?
Mhm.
And they're going to be provided by the developer. And so I think there are mechanisms to do that within the bylaw, but
Yeah, ACCs, you could provide a kind contribution.
yeah.
Yep.
So I think it'll be really important that that language for flexibility allows for, because that's where the magic really happens, like when there's these net benefit opportunities.
Awesome.
All right, well, we'll go one final, go to the folks online in case there are any final questions. I suspect there aren't, but put up your hand or unmute yourself if you have any.
Actually, I just have one. It's Emma here. One quick clarification. Originally, you said the effective date might be February, but you're also saying that we're not going out for further consultation until January. And so is that effective date going to be pushed a bit farther into the spring?
I mean, I haven't requested a council date for this yet. And we do kind of really, it is a bit kind of tied to that transportation master plan that I believe is going in January. So I probably have a better idea of when it's going to go in the new year. February might not be, it may be realistic, like the ACC and the DCC might end up getting split given that information, but we really kind of, we don't know the direction that council is going to provide at this time. So I suspect the ACC bylaw may come sooner, but we'll have to just kind of wait and see. I would think that the consultation will start in kind of early January, around the same time as that transportation master plan, because realistically, trying to do consultation around the holidays is not a great idea. So do it in January when everyone's had some time off and get back into talking about fees.
Yeah, makes sense. How long does the inspector of municipalities usually take to review the DCC bylaw?
Dave, do you know the answer to that question?
Hey there.
Hey.
Dave, Director of Major Projects. Yeah, I think typically in the past it's been one to 2 months, roughly. Sometimes I think it's been a bit quicker than that, but yeah, it's kind of all over the map, but generally within that time frame.
Okay, works for me. Thanks.
Okay, well, if we don't have any final questions, then I think we can call this meeting good. I really appreciate everyone's time and really good feedback so far, and we'll keep you posted on the next round of engagement.
Thanks so much.